Imagine walking into your parents' home at 89 years old, and the hallway is so choked with boxes, stacks of magazines, and furniture pushed against the walls that you can barely take a step. Your mother stands there, almost guarding the space, insisting nothing can be moved. Not because she's being difficult. Not because she doesn't trust you. But because to her, every single object in that hallway is a lifeline, a thread tying her to the moments, people, and seasons of life she fears will disappear if they go. To you, it might look like clutter. To her, it's her wedding day folded into a tablecloth, her best friend's laughter in an old photo album, her late husband's presence in a coat that hasn't been worn in decades. And here's the truth, this isn't laziness, and it's not greed. It's something far more human. It's about memory, identity, and the fear that once an object leaves, the story it carries might fade forever. If you've ever seen this in someone you love, or felt it in yourself, hit like, share this with someone who needs to understand, and subscribe, because what we uncover today may completely change the way you see them. Ilarene Holt is 86 years old and has lived in the same small Pennsylvania home for more than 5 decades. She spent most of her life surrounded by books, first as a young library assistant, then as the head librarian in her town, where she knew every patron by name and could recommend a story for any mood. Back then, her days were filled with people, conversations, and the quiet rustle of turning pages. But now, her world has narrowed. She's mostly housebound, her walks limited to the familiar path from her bedroom to the kitchen, and sometimes just the living room chair by the window. The hallway between those rooms, once wide and open, has slowly become lined with boxes, stacks of magazines, and piles of items she insists have a place and a purpose. To anyone else, the space might look chaotic. To her, it's a carefully arranged museum of a life fully lived. Her daughter, who visits every week, has gently asked, sometimes pleaded, to help clear the path so Ilarene can move safely without risk of tripping. She worries about her mother's health, about how quickly a fall could change everything. But no matter how the conversation begins, it always ends the same way. Ilarene will put her hand on one of the boxes, almost protectively, and say, "Not yet. I'm not ready." It's not about the physical act of cleaning, it's about what cleaning means. To Ilarene, each box is a safeguard against forgetting, each stack of magazines is a reminder of afternoons spent reading with her late husband, each random trinket holds a connection to a friend, a neighbor, or a moment in time. Removing them feels like cutting cords she's not prepared to sever. She isn't clinging to clutter in the way the word is often used, she's holding on to a world she fears will vanish if these objects disappear. In her mind, they are more than things, they are anchors. They keep her tethered to identities she once held: wife, librarian, friend, hostess, roles she worries might fade into the background if she lets go. And for her, keeping them isn't about hoarding stuff at all. It's about holding on to proof that her story, and everything in it, still matters. For many seniors, the objects filling their homes are far more than possessions. They are irreplaceable evidence that they have lived, loved, worked, and mattered. They aren't just holding on to a dress or a letter, they're holding on to a chapter of their personal history that feels too important to risk losing. A wedding invitation tucked inside a drawer isn't merely a slip of paper, it's the memory of a day when every seat was filled with people who believed in their future. A small brass nameplate from the library desk doesn't just mark a job, it represents decades of service, the hundreds of children she guided to their first favorite book, the quiet pride of being a part of the community's heartbeat. And that faded scarf, knitted by a friend in 1962, carries the warmth of a friendship that lasted through marriages, children, illnesses, and loss. To an outsider, these objects may appear worn out, outdated, or insignificant. But for the person who owns them, each one is a living bookmark in the story of their life. Letting go is not just about removing clutter, it can feel like surrendering a witness to their journey, handing it to a stranger who will never know what it meant, or worse, who will see it as junk. This is why, for some older adults, the idea of donating or throwing away certain items is met with such quiet resistance. It's not that they can't part with things, it's that they can't part with proof. In the United States, especially, where so much value is placed on youth, speed, and what's current, older voices often fade into the background. Seniors can feel overlooked in conversations, underestimated in their abilities, and left out of decision-making in their own families. In that silence, objects take on a new role. They become their voice when no one is asking questions. The worn apron in the kitchen says, "I once made Sunday dinners for a house full of people." The creased dance ticket says, "I was young once, and I was chosen." These items speak volumes in a language that can't be heard if they are tossed aside. This is why, for someone like Ilarene, the thought of letting go isn't about cleaning up a hallway or creating more space, it's about protecting a personal archive. Every item she keeps is a small monument to her existence, a tangible assurance that her story won't be erased simply because time has moved forward. And until she feels certain that those stories can live on without the objects, she will guard them with the same care someone else might give to a fragile heirloom. For many seniors, what looks like keeping junk to others is actually a form of emotional insurance, a self-made safety net for an unpredictable future. The habit doesn't start overnight. It's shaped by decades of lived experience, moments where life shifted without warning, and lessons passed down from parents and grandparents who survived times of true scarcity. That quiet fear, the one rarely spoken out loud, whispers, "What if I need this someday? What if I can't replace it when I do?" For Ilarene, it's why a broken lamp sits in the corner, the shade bent and cord frayed. She tells herself she might fix it, but the truth is deeper. Getting rid of it feels like removing a fallback option, no matter how unlikely it is she'll ever use it. A tin of spare buttons, saved over decades, becomes more than sewing supplies. It's a small vault of preparedness. Even a stash of grocery bags feels like a resource she can count on if things ever get tight. To her, these items are not clutter, they are shields against a future where resources could run out. This mindset is particularly common among older Americans who were raised by Depression-era parents or who navigated adulthood during times of economic instability, like the 1970s inflation. They were taught that nothing should go to waste, that everything could serve another purpose, and that throwing something away before it was truly unusable was a form of carelessness, even danger. Those lessons sink deep, and as the years pass, they can transform into a near-instinctive reluctance to part with anything that might be useful someday. What's more, the pace of change in the modern world can make seniors feel even more vulnerable. Rising costs, unexpected medical bills, and a retirement system that doesn't always stretch as far as promised all feed the belief that holding on to what you already have is safer than letting it go. Even if the items are outdated, broken, or excessive, they represent stability in a time when so many other things feel uncertain. This is why simply telling someone like Ilarene to just throw it away rarely works. To her, that advice sounds like an invitation to be unprepared. It's not that she can't part with an old lamp or a pile of bags, it's that doing so feels like dismantling her backup plan. The real challenge, then, is helping seniors build a sense of safety that isn't tied to the sheer number of possessions they own. Until they can see that their security can come from relationships, community support, and well-planned resources, not just from objects, the safety net illusion will remain one of the strongest forces behind holding on. For some seniors, certain possessions are not simply things, they are grief made tangible. They become time capsules, sealing away a piece of life that can never be recreated. These items are often left untouched for years, sometimes decades, because moving them, altering them, or letting them go feels like losing that loved one all over again. The grief attached to them doesn't fade in the way people often expect, it simply changes form, weaving itself into the fabric of everyday life. For Ilarene, that object is her late husband's winter coat. It still hangs on the same hook by the front door where he placed it on a cold evening 21 years ago. The sleeves are slightly worn, the fabric a bit frayed, but she has never been tempted to replace it. More tellingly, she has never washed it, afraid that the faint, lingering trace of his cologne will vanish forever. Each time she passes it, she feels a quiet presence, as if he might walk back in at any moment and slip it on before heading outside. To her, the coat is not a piece of clothing, it is the closest thing to holding him again. To those on the outside, it might seem irrational. They see just a coat, a dated garment taking up space. But for someone like Ilarene, that coat is not about practicality. It's a living link to a love story, a reminder of the years they spent building a life together, of the everyday moments that seemed ordinary at the time but now feel priceless. Removing it would not be an act of organization, it would be an act of erasure. This type of attachment is common among seniors in the United States who have endured the loss of a spouse, child, or lifelong friend. Grief has no set timeline, and possessions become safe places to store the weight of that loss. They don't ask questions, they don't fade in their significance, and they don't require the mourner to move on before they are ready. In many cases, they allow the grieving person to maintain a sense of connection in a world that has already taken too much. What makes this grief so enduring is that it often blends into the fabric of daily life. The coat hanging by the door isn't just about the past, it becomes part of the present. It offers comfort on difficult days, reassurance in moments of loneliness, and a silent witness to the passage of time. Asking someone to part with such an object without understanding the depth of its meaning risks not only emotional harm but also a deep rupture of trust. For families trying to help, the first step isn't to suggest removing these items. It's to listen. Ask about the story behind them. Understand why they matter. Sometimes, simply giving space for those stories to be told can allow the person to consider alternative ways to honor the memory, like preserving the scent in a keepsake, photographing the item, or passing it on to someone who will cherish it as much as they do. Until then, the grief remains, quietly waiting, and the object continues to serve as its vessel. For many seniors, the thought of letting go of belongings is not simply about parting with objects, it is about confronting the idea that their life is entering its final chapters. Downsizing, reorganizing, or clearing a space can feel less like tidying up and more like preparing for an ending they aren't ready to acknowledge. This is why the suggestion to start clearing things out can be met with hesitation, resistance, or even outright refusal. It's not about stubbornness, it's about survival of the spirit. When a person has lived in the same home for decades, the objects inside become silent companions in their daily story. Every photo, every book, every piece of furniture holds a role in the ongoing narrative of their life. To remove them all at once feels like dismantling the set while the play is still running. Many seniors feel that as long as their surroundings remain intact, so too does their sense of being in the middle of the story, not at the end. For someone like Ilarene, keeping her home exactly as it has always been is a way of preserving momentum. The boxes in the hallway, the shelves crowded with keepsakes, even the old calendar from years ago still hanging in the kitchen, they all give her a sense that time hasn't closed in on her. She may not be able to work or travel like before, but her environment tells her she's still in the scene. The moment those boxes are gone, she fears the next scene will be her last. This feeling is not uncommon among seniors in the United States, especially those who have witnessed peers or relatives rapidly downsize only to experience a swift decline in health or independence. Whether or not those events are truly connected, the perception remains powerful. Clearing out equals closing down. The connection between possessions and vitality is deeply personal, but it can be hard for outsiders to see. The truth is, clearing space does not have to signal an ending, but convincing someone of that requires sensitivity. For seniors, the process must feel like an act of living, not a rehearsal for departure. That means framing decluttering not as wrapping things up, but as making room for what still lies ahead, whether that's hosting family, starting a new hobby, or simply moving more freely through the home without risk. Families can help by shifting the conversation away from getting rid of things and toward creating space for the next chapter. Rather than saying, "You won't need this anymore," it can be more powerful to say, "What do you want to make room for?" This reframes the act from an ending to a choice about the future. Because for someone like Ilarene, the movie is not over yet, and the last thing she wants is to feel the credits rolling before she's had the chance to finish her own story. Keeping her surroundings intact allows her to feel that the plot is still unfolding, that her role is still active, and that there are still scenes worth filming. The challenge lies in showing her that even with fewer objects, the story doesn't have to end. In fact, it might just gain a new beginning. When family members see a loved one living in a home crowded with possessions, their instinct is often to jump into action, to help by quickly clearing space, hauling out boxes, and removing what they see as hazards or unnecessary clutter. On the surface, it seems like the most caring thing to do: make the environment safer, more open, and easier to navigate. But for someone like Ilarene, this kind of help can feel less like kindness and more like an invasion. To her, every object in her home is part of a carefully woven personal history. It's not that she believes each item is valuable in a monetary sense, it's that these items form the backdrop of her life, the set on which her story has played out for decades. When someone swoops in and starts removing things without her full understanding or agreement, it feels like parts of that story are being rewritten or erased. It's not simply stuff that's leaving the house, it's context, continuity, and pieces of identity. This is why many elderly parents push back when adult children try to fix the situation. The resistance is rarely about the physical objects alone. It's about control. In a stage of life when so many decisions, from medical care to transportation, are already being made by others, the home can feel like the last domain where they still hold authority. If that control is threatened, even by well-meaning family members, the instinct is to defend it fiercely. In the United States, where independence is deeply tied to a person's sense of worth, this dynamic is even stronger. Seniors may already be adjusting to reduced mobility, changing social circles, and the loss of certain freedoms. Their home, no matter how cluttered, is a place where they can still set the rules. Stripping it down without their input can unintentionally send the message: your choices no longer matter. The solution isn't speed, it's collaboration. What someone like Ilarene truly needs is not a dumpster in the driveway, but a conversation at the kitchen table. She needs to be asked about what matters most to her, to be given time to process each decision, and to feel that her memories and attachments are being respected, not bulldozed. Practical steps might include starting with non-emotional areas, setting a pace she's comfortable with, and allowing her to choose what leaves and what stays. Even taking photographs of special items before they are passed on can ease the transition. The key is to keep her in the driver's seat, so the process feels like a shared project rather than an imposed change. Because at its heart, this kind of resistance isn't about hoarding or refusing help, it's about preserving dignity. When we recognize that, the goal shifts from clearing the house to honoring the person who lives in it. And that small change in approach can mean the difference between creating trust and creating distance. When helping a senior sort through a lifetime of belongings, the single most important thing to remember is that this process should feel like an act of respect, not a forced surrender. The moment it starts to feel like someone is taking over, the walls go up, and for good reason. This is not about boxes, shelves, or storage bins. It's about the memories, identity, and sense of control tied to those objects. The goal is to preserve the person's dignity while still making progress toward a safer, more manageable living space. One of the most effective approaches is to start small and start neutral. Rather than diving into highly sentimental areas like photo albums or heirlooms, begin with a single, non-emotional space: a kitchen junk drawer, a corner of the garage, or an old linen closet. These areas still hold meaning, but they are less likely to trigger deep emotional resistance. By beginning here, the senior can ease into the process without feeling like they are being asked to tear apart the heart of their home. Another powerful strategy is to capture the essence of an item before it's let go. Taking clear, well-lit photographs allows the memory to remain even if the physical object does not. For someone like Ilarene, this can be a game changer, knowing she can flip through a photo album and still see the quilt her grandmother made or the first set of books she bought as a librarian means she can release the physical object without feeling like the story is lost. Digital storage, printed albums, or even framed collages can all help preserve those connections. A third approach is to make decluttering a shared storytelling experience rather than a silent, mechanical task. Setting aside a regular story hour transforms the process into something meaningful. The senior selects an item, tells the story behind it, who gave it to them, what moment it represents, and then decides whether it's something they truly want to keep in their present life. This not only honors the object but also gives the family a chance to preserve oral history that might otherwise be lost. These recorded memories can become a treasured legacy for children and grandchildren. Most importantly, the emphasis should never be on the stuff itself, but on the person who owns it. Each decision should be framed around their comfort, values, and wishes. Instead of saying, "You don't need this," try, "Would you like to make room for something new here?" This keeps the senior in control and shifts the conversation from loss to opportunity. By moving at their pace, respecting their choices, and valuing their stories, you're not just clearing space in a home, you're building trust and showing love in one of the most vulnerable stages of life. The real success is not measured by how many bags leave the house, but by how much the person feels heard, respected, and safe throughout the journey. 4 years, conversations between Ilarene and her daughter about the hallway ended in frustration. Her daughter would point to the stacks of boxes and warn about the danger of tripping. Ilarene would respond with a quiet but firm, "Not yet. I'm not ready." The more her daughter pushed, the tighter Ilarene held on. It wasn't stubbornness, it was fear that clearing the space meant erasing the life she'd built. Then one day, something shifted. Instead of coming in with garbage bags or a list of what needed to go, her daughter sat down on the floor beside one of the boxes and gently picked up a book. She didn't say, "You don't need this," or "We should donate it." She simply asked, "Tell me about this book. Who gave it to you?" At first, Ilarene was guarded, unsure where the conversation was going. But as she began to tell the story about the neighbor who had gifted it to her when she was recovering from an illness, and how reading it had made her feel less alone, something unexpected happened. Instead of defending the object, she found herself celebrating the memory. The story flowed easily, and when she finished, her daughter suggested taking a photo of the book and writing down its history so the memory could be shared with the grandchildren. That one interaction opened the door to many more. Each session became less about getting rid of things and more about honoring the stories behind them. They laughed over some memories, teared up over others, and slowly, Ilarene began to see that the value of these possessions was not in their physical presence, but in the life they represented. She realized that keeping the memory didn't require keeping the weight of every single object. It was not a fast process. The hallway didn't clear in a weekend, and that was the point. It happened at a pace that felt safe. But over time, one box became two, two became 5, and the once narrow hallway began to open up. The space that had been cramped and dim was now clear, bright, and easy to walk through. The most remarkable part was that Ilarene didn't feel a sense of loss. Instead, she felt lighter, relieved, and even proud. Her stories hadn't vanished, they were preserved, shared, and cherished. The boxes were gone, but the memories remained, sharper and more vibrant than ever. In the end, what she had feared would be an ending turned out to be a new way of keeping her history alive. When we take the time to look beyond the stacks of boxes and the crowded shelves, we begin to see something far more important than the clutter itself. We see the person. We see their history, their fears, their love, and the moments they've fought to hold on to. And often, that simple shift in perspective changes everything. Because when someone feels truly seen and understood, the grip on their belongings can begin to loosen naturally. Letting go stops being about losing things, and starts being about making room, for safety, for connection, for the life they still have to live. When we see past the piles, we see the heart. And sometimes, that's all it takes to help them let go. If this opened your eyes to what hoarding really means, don't keep it to yourself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, a friend, a sibling, a neighbor who's been struggling to understand. And if you believe more people need to approach this topic with compassion, hit like, leave a comment with your own experience, and subscribe. Because your next chapter, and theirs, should feel lighter, freer, and fully yours.